party people. Hey, hey.
Howdy.
She's about to go live.
Oh,
Just
a
tactics. I just want to make sure I'm
that's
not.
fine. I don't mind saying that.
I'm in pink.
Talbot.
Says it.
It was cute. I really liked it.
Are we set up in the other room for the meeting?
Yeah.
We had, we were in that room last night.
Yeah.
Just put it back.
But I couldn't really tell.
To display.
Well, we ended up having to take
What
them
it
all
is.
out.
And that, you know.
It was not a small,
Oh.
How many people were there? You couldn't tell.
it wasn't that many, but it was more than would fit with the wall.
Gotcha.
Last night.
Scabbard meeting.
Does anyone know if they will need to be sharing for the Zoom just so we can get you in the, okay, so you are cool.
I have the link.
Perfect. I just
Yep.
want to make sure I get you in here. Yeah.
And then.
I'm fine. Yep.
Too many.
Well, welcome everyone to the March 24th Student Learning and Achievement Committee meeting. It's 6:32. I'm officially calling the meeting to order, and board members present today are Dion Manley, Laurel Pickle-Antonio, and Sue Horn, myself. The agenda for tonight is on learning loss and assessment update and a brief COVID-19 update. So I'll turn it over to Ms. Kelly.
Thanks, Kara. So we're excited to be here tonight to give a little bit of insight about the district's response to, I'm calling it pandemic influenced learning needs. So back in July, we actually had an SLA meeting where we spent some time talking about assessment tools and instructional support to support our students and teachers not after, but during the pandemic. And at that point in time, we talked a lot about a universal screener tool we were planning to bring in for the school year, and then some of the other assessment tools and supports we were going to be putting in place. Last week at finance, I gave a pretty detailed explanation of how the funds were allocated. I'm going to share my screen now. I shared information about a survey that had been done with the community. Also shared a little bit of detail about some of the discussions and planning that had happened with district staff, and then ultimately kind of the breakdown and how those funds were allocated. Before we head into tonight's content, I just wanted to share one additional piece of information that I didn't share last week at the finance meeting, and that is that the grant funds are reimbursable funds. And so we submit receipts and payments through a project cash request, and then we get reimbursed for those expenditures. So just a minor detail that I wanted to make sure that that was apparent to everyone that's interested, that it's not a big lump, sum of money that we have kind of sitting around. It's as we use it, we submit, and then we get reimbursed for it. So tonight we're going to be focused on the academic side of things. Of course, we know that there are social emotional needs and some behavior needs that we've been working through as well. We do have an SLA meeting coming up in a couple months where we'll be focusing on mental health supports and school counseling supports. So we'll dive in specifically to some of those additional behavior and mental health needs at that time. But today we're going to be focused specifically on the academic side of things. We're going to dive a little bit into the data we've gathered and how we're responding to it. As well as some of the instructional tools and supports that we have in place. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to our Director of Curriculum, Ms. Tia Holloman.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. And so we're kind of just going to go almost in chronological order a little bit in terms of just giving you an update on some of the things that we use the ESSER funds for, starting with the summer of 2021. We had a record number of student participation in our Journey to Learning summer school program last summer with 964 total enrollments. And that is meaning the number of seats in classes. So not necessarily the number of students, but because we have students that might take reading and math, but 964 total enrollments. Our Journey to Learning program is preschool through 12th grade, focused on readiness for kindergarten, reading and math for grades 1 through 8, and new credit and makeup credit for high school. So that's just the span of what our summer school, which is the program that we've had in place, but that's where we started. In addition to our summer school programming, we also were able to offer some enrichment learning activities last summer. And so we started with partnering with Jump Bunch, which was like fitness camps that we were able to bring to our elementary school students. They had a grade banded K2 and 3-5. And among those two camps, we had 69 students that participated in that. We also had one of our school librarians host a journaling club for our students in grades 4 through 6. And then we had 19 students participate in that. One of our gifted intervention specialists from the elementary school used COSI STEM kits to host a week-long STEM experience. And the kids have like 5 days worth of activities in it. And so that's what gave us the opportunity to do a week-long experience for those students in grades 3 through 5. And we had 20 students participate in that. And then lastly, we partnered with Junior Achievement to offer their JA Business of Social Impact program. And that was a 3-day experience where students got to learn about how businesses make social impact, and they kind of got to create a business and a plan, and that was connected with the community. And there were about 20 students that participated in that. And
Are those numbers that participated in these special programs, is that included in
that
the
is not
64?
included in the Journey to
Okay.
Learning. So that's in addition to the Journey to Learning. Now, for some, there might have been some slight overlap, but for the most part, those were unique students in the enrichment programs. And those happened in the afternoon of the days of the summer school program.
And just to make a connection to the funding, that was available free for our students. And so we will be offering summer school free again. And so we hope to see the same type of numbers or increased numbers as well moving forward.
Yeah, and that was the piece. I do anticipate that we will have higher participation in summer school this year again as well, because we are able to offer it for free again to our families. One of the differences, though, is we are not offering the separate enrichment experiences this summer, but what we are working towards is more incorporation of those enrichment experiences into the summer school classes that we have. Because one of the things that we found, it was really fun and great for us to be able to offer that, but we were very limited in the numbers of students that could access it just because of staffing and the space that we had. So we've been working hard and continue to work hard to incorporate more of those experiences into our summer school classes that are already in Journey to Learning. And for example, COSI has already reached out and talked about the STEM kits that they'll have available for us again this year. So we're making those changes, and we'll have some updates on participation once summer school registration opens up. And then as we move into, so as Jill had mentioned, this is our first year implementing the universal screener district-wide. And we did this for all K through 10 students. Just as a reminder again, so our universal screener is in WEA MAP, and it measures academic performance in reading and math. The MAP suite is used by over 275 different districts in Ohio. And that's because it's norm referenced and it is approved by ODE for many of the required assessments that we are expected to give. And so it's kind of like that, just playing that double dipping piece. Those assessments being the K3 reading, diagnostic, the third grade reading guarantee, and gifted identification. So that we're trying to maximize the amount of data that we can get for students, but also be efficient in how much we are assessing students. So where we can get multiple or check off multiple mandates, that's what we're trying to do. This year we administered in 3 different windows, fall, winter, and spring for grades K through 6. And then 2 windows, fall and spring, for 7 and 10. And again, that is just based off of what research shows in terms of the information that we get. They recommend just the 2 times as the students get older. And so that's what we followed for this year. We are currently in the spring window. It wraps up tomorrow. But during this presentation, we want to show you how our fall and winter data looks. And then later on in the presentation, you'll hear some of the other ways that the MAP data has been used throughout the year.
Tia, do you want to touch on why our spring window is now in March as opposed to like at the end of the year when we might typically make an assessment for you?
So we had a lot of conversations about the best times in the year to get some data that could be actionable and used within the schools. And we ended up settling on our spring window being in March because it still gives us plenty of time to take some action for the rest of the year to get students some support that they need, but to also make some very intentional plans for that support for the fall. Whereas testing in May, we would get some data, but then it's a short amount of time for plans for the fall. So wrapping up now, once we get back from spring break, we'll really be diving into that data and really setting up the rest of this year and what the fall looks like for our students.
The other thing that comes into play here is state testing happens in the month of April. And it looks different at different levels, but it pretty much spans the whole month of April. I think the math, science, and social studies window closes at the first week of May.
Yes.
And so as to not overload kids, of course, in that testing setting, but still having data that can be acted upon. March is kind of where it fell.
Okay, and so, what I have here is just a snapshot of what
You
the,
have this slide.
No, we didn't get it.
I bet you do.
The slides will be in the SLA folder.
Oh,
I'm
Um,
gonna look there and wait for like somebody to tell me that it's.
sorry. So this is the snapshot of the norms that are set by NWEA based on the study that they have done. They updated their norms for 2020, and they did that. That happened between 2015 to 2018 is when they do the research and the studying for that to give us the 2020 norms. Prior to that, it was the 2015 norms. So these are the ones that we operate on, and just kind of do that comparison. And again, while I said there are over 275 districts in Ohio that use it, but thousands of districts across the country also use it. So there's a ton of data that goes into their study in order for them to get to the part of those norms. And these are going to be the mean RIT scores per grade level for these different content, reading and then math. And so just to kind of give you some context, because the next we'll take a look at what our data is for the fall and the winter. Question?
Yeah, can you explain how is what we're using like different than the state testing the kids do? Because that's so much testing.
Yes, so this testing is connected and aligned to our standards. So it gives us more actionable data, or data quicker than what the state tests do. But it also can be used to help us to predict students' performance on those state tests. So they have also done a number of research within the state of Ohio and what our tests measure to see how students are performing in different areas of the MAP test, how they would then perform on the state test. And what that information gives us as a district then is we can start to identify if students need to be enriched further. So if they're already meeting the mark and we need to push them further so that they can continue to grow, or if they're not quite at the benchmark that they need to be successful, now we can catch that early before the state tests happen and hope to intervene before then. Typically what happens is, we do the state test in April, and then we don't get the data until late summer, and then we can't act on it. And then that's past data that we then are trying to act retroactively the next year. So this data, we get it quicker, we're able to kind of act on it and try to be more preventative and proactive with students.
And one of the things we hope to do is, again, this is just our first year, but to be able to look at those trends, and they have predictors for, how a student is performing on the MAP assessment is a good predictor of how they'll perform on the state assessment. So we haven't had a year to dig into that data, but that's something that we'll be doing.
So there's going to be a series of slides that look like this for you to be able to kind of see where our data is between fall and winter. And so first, I just want to kind of orient you to what you're looking at, and then we'll kind of go through. The first, it's sectioned off, and this is just the nature of how MAP produces the reports. So that's why it's looking like this. But the first part is a K2 reading. The next part is the 2.5 reading, and then on the next slide, we'll see the 6+ reading. And again, those are essentially like two different tests based on the grade band, so that's why it produces the score report like this. You might also notice that in the K2 and the 2.5, second grade is repeated. And essentially, so as I had mentioned earlier, MAP is approved for several assessments that ODE requires us to give, one being gifted identification, but it's only the reading and math 2.5 that are approved for gifted ID, and not the K2. So when we processed initially which assessment we would give to our second graders, we went for the 2.5. What NWEA does though suggest is if you have second graders, when they take that first test in the fall, if they score at a RIT score below 170, then they recommend that we give them the K2 version because they feel like that's more on their academic level, and then we would be able to better serve them. So you will see, some overlap with second grade, and that's going to be the reason why. So to start here, as you're looking, so now we've got for each grade, it's listed twice because it's going to have the fall and the winter, the number of students in that grade level that tested, and the mean RIT score for that grade level. And so that's going to be the average of all of the scores and where they fall. We're going to have that for kindergarten, first grade, and then you'll want to jump down to the second one for 2, 3, 4, and 5. For each of the grade levels here on the reading for the fall and the winter, well, excuse me, for the fall, they were between 3 to 5 RIT points higher than the normed RIT score for the fall.
Our district
Our
average.
district average at that grade level was between 3 and 5 RIT points higher than the normed average for that grade level for the fall. And then 1 to 5 points higher than the normed RIT score for the winter administration.
But they all went up from fall to winter.
Yes,
So
they did all go up from
very
fall to
positive,
winter.
right?
How does that break down by school though? Because averages are averages, you know? So I would
Yes.
think that I guess the question is, by each individual elementary, what does it look like? Are
Yes.
you gonna get to that or?
So I don't have I just have the high level districts for this presentation, but I can follow up with the buildings.
Okay.
And throughout, so it gets even more granular. So from the building perspective, they are looking at their building level by grade, then they can drill down to class level and all the way down to individual student.
Right.
But for this presentation, I just stuck with district level for now. But the other piece I want to draw your attention to, so that first column is the average RIT score for the entire test, but then it also breaks down the RITs for the instructional area. And again, it dives deeper into different reports that help to identify, okay, what skills, what areas, or how students are performing in those different areas. And so that instructional area performance is what you're seeing there. One of the things, and so that's not, you're not going to notice it on this page, but you'll see it in some of the pages after this, is that some of the means are going to be bold and either underlined or bold and italic. And that is the indicator of relative strengths and relative areas of concern or areas to watch. And the way that is calculated is they look at that particular instructional area. And if it is a relative strength, which would be bolded and underlined, it is more than 3 RIT points higher than what the mean grade level average is. And if it's a relative area of concern or watch, it's going to be more than 3 RIT scores below what that grade level. So it's also, those scores are all relative to the overall average for that grade level. And these for all of our K-5, their instructional areas are all right in line with the average RIT. So that's why we don't see anything highlighted here.
Is grade 5 though? I mean, isn't that bolded on the bottom line? No.
I can't.
Yes. So, and it'll be
It's bolded to me with it without the
it'll
glasses.
be bold and underlined or bold and italic. So not just bold.
Oh,
it'll be
that's
both.
how like.
Mhm.
All right.
Yeah. So
Gotcha.
look for the italics or the underline.
It's hard.
A lot of numbers.
I know.
Okay, if you want to jump to the, excuse me, the 6th and up. And so this is, excuse me, this is going to be for our 6th grade through 10th grade. And again, it's going to have the same orientation with the grade, fall and winter, the mean average, fall and winter, and then the instructional area breakdowns.
Tia, do you want to explain why, if we only give it up through 10th grade, why we have some 11th and 12th graders on there?
Yes.
And why there might be some that have a winter score?
Yes, thank you. So the other thing, so when we talked about the universal screener, we did set it at the K-10, and again, that's just kind of following research around universal screeners. But we also have used it for our students, students who have transferred in that we might not have enough information about them and their performance tips, so that we can help them and place them. And also our students that might be going through the MTSS process, so that system to be able to provide them some additional support. The MAP test has been able to, again, give us some data about where they're currently performing so that we can better align them with the support that they need. academically. And so that's where you're going to see that, you know, for the fall of 11th grade and 12th grade, that might be some of those cases where it was either a move-in or it was a student who's going through the MTSS process to get that data. And then the same thing for 7, 8, 9, and 10, while you don't really see winter data, because we don't have a set administration for winter for those grade levels, but we will have spring data for them at the end of this week.
That makes sense now. The numbers went down. That's the only.
and part of that too, so like for the ones that you might see some winter, and I think you'll see more of this in the math reports, is that there may be some slight variation or some dips. And again, we're looking to gather information about the supports that those students may need. And so here is our map or our math growth data. We have many more sections of math, so I'll go through here. But again, we're starting with the K2, and then we have the 2-5. Our math scores are a little bit different than what our reading scores were. A good celebration here, we had the fall mean RIT score for kindergarten was 7 points higher than what the normed mean score is for kindergarten. And it was 3 points higher for the winter. And then in grades 1 through 5, the fall scores for math are between 1 and 3 points lower than what the normed RIT score is for those grade levels. And that was grades 1 through 5.
That's really interesting about kindergarten. You know,
They started off very strongly, yes. And then, and it's the same for the winters. They're about 1 to 3 RIT points lower than what the normed RIT for grades 1 through 5 is for math. For grades 6 through 10, the mean RIT scores fall right in line with what the normed RIT scores are for those grade levels at both fall and winter.
But is that really surprising? Because for these kids that had 2 years, basically, or a year and a half of learning math remotely cannot be equal to learning in a classroom, right?
Correct.
So
yeah. And so that is definitely brings up a good point. And I think, you know, those are the we kind of went into this year anticipating that there were going to be some needs, but what this has allowed us to do is actually pinpoint where those needs are so that we can better align our services to support that. Not even just services like the interventions that we provide outside of the classroom, but also what happens inside of the classroom. And so again, looking at now, so here's an example where you can see the change. There you go.
it's bolded.
Yes, it's bolded and underlined. So for that one, it is a relative strength of the students in 8th grade that did a winter testing. And again, you'll see, so in the fall of 8th grade, we had 465 students take it. That was generally the 8th grade class across the district, but then we only had 16 in the winter. And we know that at the middle school, some of those students were actively engaged in some interventions. And so it was kind of like a progress monitoring for those students to see how they performed.
And they did.
And then if you also go up, so grade 5 in the fall, operations and algebraic thinking is a relative area to watch based on it being bold and italicized. And so again, this just gives us a general overview district-wide, but buildings and teachers are able to drill much further down into it to actually see, okay, how do we use that information then to impact instruction? Okay, and then if you want to go to, so then for our high school and our middle school students in these classes, they actually took the algebra or geometry math, because what we wanted to do is still get good math data, but also for it to be actionable for the actual classes that they're in. And so that's what these scores are. One of the things that's different though is that math, because the subject specific tests aren't as widely given, they don't have the huge norm study like the Math 6+, But they had done a smaller study, and it is located on their website. It was published in 2019 with just a comparison of sampling testing of how students that were taking the subject-specific scores were performing. And so here, these are how our students performed taking the algebra and the geometry, 7th grade through 10th grade. The norm score based off the report that was published in 2019 for math, students, the mean for 7th grade algebra is 244.48. So again, you can compare it to where our 7th graders are. 8th grade is 239.67.
Where do you see that information, or is that on a different?
It's just on a different page. It's different.
So.
It's okay. Just for you
guys.
guys.
I was
say.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
The 9th grade is 227.76. And 10th grade is 225.14. And so that's for algebra. And then for geometry, 7th grade is 261.54. 8th grade is 250.80. 250.80. 9th grade is 243.48. And 10th grade is 230.96. And so again, those are the means from NWEA study, and this is how our students performed in the fall for those tests. So we'll have the spring data after.
So then Tia, based on the numbers you were sharing, I think if I was following right, 9th grade is the one grade level that was slightly below the average. I thought you said
No.
240.
That's what I thought too, but I thought.
For geometry?
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, 243.
243. Okay.
Mhm. And so typically, you know, NWEA uses that more than 3 points.
Yeah.
So if we're still in that, and then the other thing that we need to factor in, which is off to the side here, but is that standard deviation, so that distribution of scores also, that I didn't really highlight, but we're within that norm range for our 9th grade. And again, so, you know, we're wrapping up spring testing here, and so we will be able to dive into that data and really kind of get a full year's picture. I know we still have much more of the year to go, but that's a good place to take a look at. And then, like I said, really start to think intentionally about the supports that we're going to put in place for next year for students, because now we have this information that we can start, you know, the ground running. And then also, again, from the rest of the presentation, we hear other ways that the math data has been used with some of the other interventions we have.
So I know that families received this information. It seemed like in pretty quick turnaround time from when the students took the test. Did the individual teachers also receive
Yes.
information?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
It's definitely still, you know, a process of how to read the reports and use the reports and make connections to your, you know, classroom instruction. There are, as you can imagine, dozens of reports that can be run. And so Tia did a nice job of trying to say, like, these are the few that would be really beneficial for you to take a look at initially, and, you know, give some very specific action items for kids.
Yeah, and we've been working with the coaches too, to help, because then they can take it back to the teachers in ways like which different reports give good information about classroom instruction.
Did the parents get their individual child?
Yes.
And how they
Yes.
did it?
Yeah.
Yes.
With some, it came with links to be able to look up what the tests are.
Yeah. Yeah, so NWEA does have a vast amount of resources available, which is great. And so then they actually have like a family toolkit. And so we make sure that we include that in the letter that goes home as well, because it has even more information to help families to understand what the report is saying, what it means for their child, and how their teachers are using that information to support their child. Yeah. Okay, so with that,
literacy. I'm Erin Schmidt. I work with Literacy K-8, and this slide captures some information about how we targeted money toward support for some of the learning experiences to make up for some of the experiences over the past few years. The first one is the Upper Elementary Reading Alternative Instructor, or AI, we call them. We have 3.5 positions budgeted for the next 3 years, including this year, so 2 more after this. We made that decision to focus on the upper elementary because we do have reading specialists and support staff in the buildings already, and they really focus a lot on that early intervention piece. So as a team, we decided to prioritize these funds toward the upper elementary to support some of the gaps in their experiences over the last few years, fragile learning, unfinished learning. So that's why we targeted that age group. We use the map data to help us identify which students will be in those groups with the alternative instructors. In terms of using it as a universal screener, we look at the 40th percentile within the school building, and that aligns with lower to average low scoring range. And then we cross-reference that with other information we have about the readers. So we cast that wide net with our map information, and then we fine-tune things with looking at their reading levels. We look at where they are with their content in Lexia Core 5, and I'll talk a little bit more about Lexia in just a moment. And then just other diagnostic information that the teachers gather. And then from that, make decisions about having students in small groups, 2 to 5 times per week, depending on the level of need. Currently, we have 141 students across the district working with these alternative instructors. Again, they're half day of 3¼ hours per day in a building. A couple of them split across buildings. Actually, 3 of them work across 2 different buildings, and one is the half, it's in, of course, a single building. The interventions they use are mostly things we already had in place in the district that target the 5 different components of reading, how we organize our interventions. They focus on reading comprehension. Writing about reading was a big need, and having opportunities to talk about their thinking when they read a book, and then to write about it with some guidance. And that's one of the tasks that happens in our classrooms. But the alternative instructors provide a little something extra in a small group for students with that. They focus on fluency if that's a need, as well as phonics and word study components that we have in place. So
that's 4th and 5th grade. Then you're
4th and
saying-
5th and 3rd.
Oh,
Yeah,
it is
some
3rd.
Some 3rd grade. And a lot of that is because of the schedule and the way they can group across levels. So there are 3rd graders for the upper elementary. But you're right, technically upper elementary.
Because I just want to make sure I was
Yes.
clear on what we're considering.
Yeah.
upper elementary.
One of the, so I met with each alternative instructor. They were hired and kind of rolled in slowly over time. I know you're aware of the challenges of staffing positions across this year. So some started in September and some started after the new year. So we either met in a small group and did some training, and that we could really then look at the needs of the particular building or the particular, what the data indicated that we needed to have the training in. And then that's what the alternative instructors did. So they have, again, they work with a resource that helps them work with level text and writing about reading. One of the other things we trained on early was Lexia, because, so I'm going to transition to Lexia. Lexia has some really good direct instruction components. So it's an adaptive, online, engaging resource, a student learning platform. But it also has some, it'll provide targeted instruction lessons. And so sometimes alternative instructors across different levels will use that information, and teachers as well. There are slide decks in that, in Lexia, as well as, pardon me, some different text, fluency passages, etc.
And Erin,
Yeah.
that direct instruction is offline, correct?
Offline, in person, yes. So based on where students are performing, they might get stuck in one of the units or in one of the levels, and the system will indicate that there's a lesson that would really help them. And so that's been delivered to them in person.
Erin, can you talk about how Lexia Core 5 is maybe used a little bit differently now than it was when we were in remote learning?
Thank you.
Yes, yes, definitely. So in remote learning, it carried a bit more instructional load just because we were remote, and it's a supplement to instruction, but it just had to fill in more gaps of experience during that time. Now, it can be used in the classroom during independent work time. And Sharon and I worked together with both Dreambox, that you'll hear more about, as well as Lexia, to really provide some guidelines for how much usage should happen across the school day. So speaking of the usage, and then I'll kind of circle back around to how it's different. Usage definitely correlates to progress within the program. And just a bit of information that 42% of our students who started working on below grade level material when they started Lexia this school year have advanced by at least one grade level, and then 16% have either caught up to level or are above grade level. So of that 42%, some of them might still be working below grade level within Core 5. Because there's a lot of intricacies between phonological awareness and phonics and vocabulary. It covers a lot of foundational skills. So the reason I kind of diverted to that a little bit is because the Core 5 system will indicate usage goals for students based on where they are in relation to their grade level content. But the usage goals are seldom more than an hour a week. So we really provide that guidance that it's a few minutes a day or a few minutes every few days in the classroom as part of a workshop or an independent work time, and a little bit more time if there's more need for it.
So students will be pulled out if there's more need to give them more instruction. So outside of the classroom, right?
With the alternative instructors, the upper elementary AIs, yes, most of them work in small groups outside the classroom, and then Lexia can just be done in the classroom. But if an alternative instructor has information that let's do a little bit of direct instruction here, often they do that outside of the classroom.
Do you ever have parents ask to have it be something they could access at night? It seems like an effective tool. Is it available outside?
It is, yes. And it'll be available even after the school year up to a certain point. Tia, do you know about how late to the summer?
No, but we've been able to work with them the last 2 summers, I believe, to have access through the summer. And that way, and so then it becomes just an additional supplement for families to use at home during the summer.
Yeah.
And so my plan is to work with them again to do that. I imagine they will.
Yeah. And I love seeing these percentages of growth. For those that are still like at the end of the school year, if you're seeing that the growth has not happened, are those the students that we identified for summer school? And then
that, in addition to the other, there's tons of others. So looking at the map data, taking a look at reading level, taking a look at other supports that have already been put in place to see kind of where the student is in their progress of those supports, if that makes sense. Most of the time the kids are captured early, and so then that intervention is being provided ongoing, and if we're still not seeing progress, then elevated to the next step to try to figure out what's going to be to give the student the best support they need.
And that's part of the MTSS process, which we've talked a little bit about at different times, but essentially taking a look at students' deficits, what interventions are we putting in place, looking at it over time, usually 6 to 8 to 10 weeks, depending on and then if they're not making progress, what do we need to change? What other type of intervention can we put in place? And looking at it again, ultimately trying to find that right intervention that's going to help close that gap for each student.
So just to kind of reiterate, Core 5, Lexia Core 5 is a supplement to that amazing in-person learning that students do, during the school day. But it really does the usage, which is not meant to be more than a few minutes a day or up to about an hour a week. It does show that usage does impact the progress. And there's definitely a direct correlation there.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
The reading alternative instructors, how does that work as far as like does the teacher just identify kids that need extra help and they just go for that week or that month, or how do you how's that implemented?
Right, it varies. So the teacher and their team, so within the MTSS process or the multiple tiers, the multi-tiered system of support, often with the principal, the instructional coach, they look at the data, they start with the map data, and then they identify which groups of students would benefit from that extra help outside of the classroom. It's a very careful decision-making process because time out of the classroom is, away. So we try to be very careful with the scheduling. This year, a lot of this, the schedule has been with students being with the alternative instructor for multiple weeks at a time. There hasn't been tons of in and out. They've either maybe shifted levels within the group, or they've shifted to a different set of skills they need to work on. So maybe they've been really working on writing about reading and talking about the books they read, and then they hit a bump in the road with their word study, and so they have to really address that a little bit more directly. So the schedule's definitely collaboratively worked on, though. The teachers identify when would be a good time for the students to be out.
Okay, but it's kind of by looking at their testing, that's how you determine that they need the extra help.
Yes.
And then they kind of just work until they master that
Yes.
area. Okay.
Yeah.
So typically, they kind of recommend interventions be provided for at least 4 to 6 weeks to be able to give enough time to see progress. And there's progress monitoring that's happened like each week to see if that intervention is actually helping the need that's there.
Anything else about Lexia? Let me look at my notes real quick, because it really is a very layered tool. It connects to map data. We use the map data alongside it. And again, just really being mindful about the screen time that students have with Core 5.
And I will add, and you'll hear a little bit of this when we get to Dreambox as well. So like was mentioned before, when we had to go remote, we had to shift so far left to be able to accommodate for our students not being in person. And then when we came back in last spring, then we went all the way and it was like no screens. And so, but before the pandemic, I thought we were kind of in a sweet spot of having these tools as supplements to the core instructions. And so there was a much better balance, and we are slowly working our way back to that balance.
I appreciate that clarification. I know that we had a lot of conversation about that concern. I think particularly maybe when we were in a hybrid setting and there was such limited time that students were there in the buildings, that there were some concerns about using screens at all in that limited amount of time that we were in the building. So I appreciate that clarification.
Yes.
Do you think that is, do you think that there's been adequate, I guess, I think of how I want to ask the question. Do you think that all of our staff has a good understanding about?
Yeah, so as Erin had mentioned before, Erin and Sharon actually did put together a very thorough guidance document, getting us back to kind of the recommended use and the purpose behind the tools. And there was times with our MLTs and LLTs, our leadership teams at the grade levels, times with principals and with instructional coaches, kind of reiterating that. And so it's just a message that continues to feed through as they're having conversations about the units and the maps and things like that. And so like I said, we are kind of getting back to where we're truly using these tools as a support and a supplement to the instruction, because in those supplemental roles, they are good tools for students, and we do see some good correlation. Also, another thing, a lot of these align with maps, so taking kind of the map scores and they feed in, and so that kind of helps to place students where they are, so we can get more targeted, but never meant to be a replacement or to be more of the instructional load than what is actually happening in the classrooms. Thanks.
And shout out to our teachers who are artfully really taking these very scientific resources we have and weaving them into their instruction. Tia mentioned the alignment piece. One more thing about Lexia is that it aligns with our scope and sequence for our foundations phonics program, as well as our word study that we use in the upper grades. And on more than one occasion, I've heard second graders or the teachers have shared that I saw this in Lexia, making those connections between between the different formats, which shows that they're really starting. That repeated practice is so important for those skills. And so I think that's a big celebration too, the connections between it. So another celebration is that we are planning for next summer to have a homegrown institute with the Teachers College Reading and Writing Project. And that's this staff development, learning organization, research organization that is really behind our reading and writing units of study that we use. And teaching writing online has also been a big challenge, not just handwriting, but also just the process of coming up with ideas and rehearsing those ideas and elaborating. We've really tried to focus a lot on talk and the importance of that in the writing process. So next year, we want to be able to have that homegrown institute where staff developers will come here and provide that professional learning opportunity, which is a great investment because it's going to carry on the work and be responsive to our students. So, and again, I said writing focus because of the importance of that.
I'm Jason Bates. I oversee the high school curriculum. I'm just going to talk a little bit about NCTE, which is the National Council of Teachers of English. This year, we were able to include 27 teachers across the district, many of whom were secondary, to attend virtually the convention this year. The sessions were both live and recorded, and the sessions connected learning objectives to equitable practices and research, as well as ideas that included creative and innovative teaching strategies. So these support sessions also support our district goals in the sense of belonging. And so we were very fortunate to be able to have 27 teachers attend across the district this year.
Jason, were those teachers who volunteered to
yep.
participate?
Yep, and they actually, many of them, we weren't able to, typically we can't send that many because it's not,
Right.
It's in person. So a lot of teachers were very excited and, had some watch parties and.
So they were over the weekend, right? And some of them, so it was over a Saturday. So.
Yeah, I did it. It was wonderful.
So were teachers collaborating with teachers from across the entire country? Is that?
Yes.
Yes.
Did they like break them into like small groups and stuff? That's
We had a huge program to choose from. So like every session, there were like 10, 15, 20, like some of them were live, some of them were pre-recorded. So
That is one positive aspect from
Yeah.
having to learn how to do things virtually.
Yeah.
is to be able to-
Conferences have really
Yeah.
morphed
Yeah.
and become so much more accessible.
And the platforms are almost like being there. I mean,
Right.
there's a gathering space and
Have they talked about like doing a hybrid version where there's some in person, but then there is virtual for those that can?
Heard that.
Like
but I
in the
wouldn't-
future?
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they would.
Teachers College Reading and Writing Project does a lot virtually now, and they had something free all day, well, until 1 o'clock on Saturday, that we wouldn't have been able to go to New York for the morning on Saturday, but we were able to get on and watch and interact with people from all over, and
That's great.
So
Pretty
is it similar
amazing.
to the reunion?
it is a Saturday reunion. It's just online.
Was it like similar to being there? Or like going from?
Not quite as good.
I mean, the word, you're not in New York City.
just because you're with other teachers, it's
Yeah.
harder.
It's
It's
harder,
It's just
yeah.
harder.
The quality of what they were, they're so masterful with putting things in just the right amount chunks of time,
Yeah.
15-minute sessions to 50. I mean,
But they bring in, really famous authors to that. Do they have some of those?
yes,
I only attended 2 of the sessions.
yeah, they have, and people donate their time. So it's, yeah.
That's-
And one thing I'll add, Sharon and Jason will talk a little bit about this in the math content as well, but when we were looking at how to spend ESSER funds, we had a lot of conversation about, yes, we want to be able to provide some additional staff support resources, but we also need to be building capacity in our teachers because, the ESSER funds go away and some of those positions go away as also, but we want to make sure that the you know, the instructional knowledge and capacity to continue supporting our kids stays here in our district. And so, you know, we've been intentional to work in extended professional development opportunities in both literacy and math.
Can I, I'm sorry, I don't remember with the math assessments. I know that I know that it's English and math, but is it writing? I don't remember. I didn't think it was writing. No, okay.
All right. Hi, I'm Sharon Siriano, and I work with Math K-8. And so we'll talk about a few things here related to our ESSER funds and that gap closing piece. So like Erin has referenced Dreambox a few times. So Dreambox is kind of the online piece, the online resource, similar use or purpose of Lexia. So it is an adaptive online platform. So the program analyzes the different moves that the students are making. It's all through manipulation and visualizations. They're not typing in numbers to solve problems. So they're manipulating the visualizations to solve the problems. And so that the program can then analyze the different moves that they're making and the response to the prompts that they're given to, okay, are they getting this and we can move on? Do we need to scale back a little bit? So that's what we mean about the adaptive piece. And so with that, we have some student usage here that I just wanted to give a couple quick stats, and I can elaborate more and as much as you would like on the program itself. So we have student usage reports that are given to us by month. So I pulled the latest month's data. And right now, for this month, our students as an average across the district are averaging 4.2 lessons a week. Dreambox's recommendation is 5. So given, as Tia has alluded to, that kind of swing back and forth we had where, you know, in the height of the pandemic and kids were at home, a lot of times their assignment that day might be work on Dreambox and work on Lexia. That teacher might have been in one-on-one Google Meets trying to confer with students. What was everyone else doing at that time? And so they were really leveraging those online platforms a lot. And then when we thankfully got all of our students back, a lot of the philosophy was, they're with us, right? Like these screens need to go there with us. And so each month it's been interesting to watch the data because there's been, to Tia's point, that nice, we're back at a little bit of a balance for the recommendations, the purpose of the tool. So we are averaging about 4.2 lessons a week a student, very similar to Lexia, is also the amount of time that takes. So it takes about an hour a week. Some teachers structure that differently. Some might say, you know, we're gonna get on about 10 minutes a day. You know, some might say, you know, because of my workshop rotation and my small group rotation, and I know when I'm meeting with certain groups, that on those off days, that's your Dreambox time when you're not with me. So they've gotten really masterful, and in our math leadership team time, a lot of times they'll you know, say, hey, can I ask a quick question? So I've been trying this with Dreambox and structures, and what do you do? And so there's been a lot of really good idea sharing for that. Next bullet point here, next piece of data. So the student growth piece, that is the piece we can look at over time, not just by monthly. So in August, as you can imagine, you know, there was some dabbling in usage, not very much just yet, but I did want to pull for the full school year so far. And this updates at the end of a full month. So this was through February. I would have the March data for you in April. So August through February so far, much like Lexia, you'll see a correlation between usage and growth. So right now, for those months, for the students who are doing that recommended 5 or more lessons a week, we have seen that the students who are doing that, on average, those students have shown by February a year's worth of growth within the Dreambox platform. And then the students who are averaging 2 to 5 lessons per week up through February have shown on average a half a year's of growth of the Dreambox content. So again, very strong correlation between usage and growth.
How does that look for, I'm
No,
sorry,
go ahead.
how does that look for some of the students that might be further behind? Like, you know what I mean? So are you seeing in the different levels where that growth is coming from? So if the
I would have to
student-
drill down by student for that to kind of see.
I just was curious on,
Yeah,
like the upper tier ones, are they growing at a faster rate than the people that might be struggling? And are we seeing the same kind of growth?
so what's interesting about that question, Sue, is, it's a great question. The lessons at the primary level do not take as long to get through.
Right.
So it might appear to be that there's the growth through that, right? But they are more primary skills, whereas the more impactful skills, as they get older, those lessons do take a little longer to
Right.
get through. So it would be interesting to look at that, like by student, you know, their age, where they're working, and then how fast their growth has been within. There's a really cool visualization that a teacher can see of their class, and it's in these kind of grid-like, but it shows these different color-coded boxes of different grade level standards, and then it color codes in a variation of colors. It's a very interesting graphic, but you can see in what different contents they've started to progress through different grade levels worth of content. So you can see what grade level. So, and these standards, my student was working within, these grade level standards, within this domain, within this skill, they were working in this grade level standards, but in this one, it had them in this grade level standards. So there's a lot of complexities to it. But
with everything, there's always a lot of detail.
Yes.
So I was just curious for some of
that's a great
ones
question.
at the bottom, like where are we seeing
The rate of growth,
the rate of
depending on
growth.
where you started, right, is what I'm hearing the question is. Yeah, where are you going next?
So while you're writing that down, I would
Yes.
say, it's promising for us to see both with Lexia and Dreambox that, again, and this is based on the program assessment of their progress. But we are seeing what we call accelerative growth, right? They've made a year's worth of growth already in February. And that's what we want to see with kids that have bigger gaps. We need them to make accelerative growth so that we're able to close that gap. Instead of even a year's worth of growth, sometimes it's not enough to close that gap. So the fact that we are seeing some accelerative growth, that's positive.
But we don't know that year's worth of growth is only from the bottom tier, right? Or the people below. I mean, it could be accelerated people making big jumps as well.
But it would still be a year's worth of growth from where they started.
Yes.
Right?
What you're saying is that
I'm thinking of Emily in your class, which I mean, she would have been.
She would have
been
the curve. Yeah.
I mean, she would have looked at that and said, let me go.
Yes.
I see what you're saying.
You know what I mean? So that's where I'm getting is the kids looking at this as an opportunity to excel. And how does that stack up versus the kids that might be behind? That's where there's so much data. I just was curious to say where, all of that is kind of coming from.
No, I appreciate that question. I have that written down.
Okay. Thank you.
Did you have a question?
You
Go
do
next
too?
then.
Okay, I think both of us have a question.
And then Angela has a question after that.
Okay, so I cannot remember anymore. Well, I guess this is a question both for Erin and Sharon. With Dreambox and Lexia both, I don't remember what level, and I don't want to say grade level, but for how long or through what level of math and reading do those programs serve our students?
Yeah, so Dreambox caps at 8th grade.
Is it
We don't use it through 8th grade.
Right.
We use it through 5th.
Okay.
But absolutely, teachers are very aware though, if we're starting to enter content that is just feeling very inaccessible, they do reach a point where they have more questions.
Right.
That the students start to have questions and the content seems like this is not where we need to spend our time right now. What's really nice is there's an assignment piece. So there's in Dreambox, it's kind of two-pronged. One is the adaptive path. Dreambox and let Dreambox analyze and adjust. The other one is creating assignments for kids. And what's really nice is something that I really love about Dreambox is I have it as a district setting that I've let this in the program know, so to speak, that we use investigations for our core curricular tool. So a teacher can go in and assign students Dreambox lessons based on investigations units.
Okay.
So if they see that a student has, let's say, struggled in an area in a unit, and they say, let's get some more practice with that one, or there's something coming up, I want to front load you a little bit, because I know the last time we talked about this a couple months ago, this was a challenge. I'm going to give you some practice before we start that unit again in a couple weeks. So that is one piece that's wonderful. The other thing is you can make assignments also based off map data. So there's also that alignment element in settings as well. So teachers can kind of look at that and get a feel and look at students' risk scores within the different map domains and say, what might be a nice appropriate next step for the student based on this other data we have. And then certainly our intermediate teachers know at some point it might not be something where you say, we're good with this right now. Let's work on something, one of my assignments, because I can use what I know about your needs and make an appropriate assignment there.
And skill-wise, Lexia goes through 5th grade, and oftentimes students are done with it, you know, 4th, 5th grade or before.
That's what that's what I thought I remembered. I just
Good job with the shorter answer, Erin. Brevity there. It's a virtue, right?
Thank you. You know, I'm gonna wait because mine is not on Dreambox, so I'll wait till the end. It's a different.
Sure.
Actually, my first question was almost the same as girls, but what grade level it went through. Like, could my 7th grader like use Dreambox in the summer to prepare for 8th grade? Like, is it available through 8th grade?
Yeah, you can. As a district purchase, it's purchased. We have licenses K through 5, purchased for all our K through 5 students. I can tell you on a side as a parent, you can purchase your own individual license if that's something you are interested in. I'd be happy to talk to you more about that. But
okay. And then my other question was, what does Dreambox look like in the classroom? Like, is it, you know, are kids doing that on their Chromebooks while the teacher is going around doing individual help, or do they do it like in media, or when? How does that work?
Good question. Thanks. So it's done in the classroom, in their core classroom. So, but like you said, what the example you gave is a great one. That might be how it is, where you have, you know, the students are on Dreambox. There's an audio component to it, so they likely have headphones on because they're listening for the prompts. And then that does buy that teacher an opportunity to then pull a small group to, like you said, sometimes they just pull up and confer one-on-one. Sometimes they sit. It was so great the other day. I was in a math leadership team and the teacher said, yeah, I just decided I was going to walk around and just watch them. Right. And so I could learn, and then I could stop them at the moment and say, talk to me why you did that. What are you thinking about right now? Or you could see really quickly, like, oh my, you have a misconception. When I'm the one trying to think of everything in the moment and talk and prompt, there's a lot of cognitive load for a teacher all day long. Just that opportunity to watch something that's research-based, embedded, and adjusting for the student, and to be able just to prompt and ask the students questions is a really nice, is a nice opportunity for the teacher. So yeah, it looks a lot of ways. Some of them it's whole group, right? For some of them it's, okay, when you come in at this time, we know we're all going to take 10 minutes and we're going to do this. And then that's when that teacher has an opportunity to, you know, let's say pull that one student because they knew there was something else. We haven't talked about the SEL piece today, but sometimes they know there's a certain kiddos, and in their plan, we've got to have a touch base together every day and have a quick conversation about some things. And maybe that's what they're going to use that opportunity for. So
SEL.
it can
You
look
want to describe SEL?
Social emotional.
Sorry about that.
Just
We
in case
love, love our letters, don't we? We love our acronyms, I know. Thank you. So yeah, the structure can look a lot of ways, which is kind of the glory of it, I think. So teachers appreciate that. Yeah.
Bridges.
Okay, and let me make sure with, yeah, hold on. Okay, so with Bridges then, so Bridges is brand new to us this year. And I'm going to actually say it's Bridges Intervention, because Bridges is its own separate thing. It's its own curriculum. And an offshoot of that same company is Bridges Intervention. The beautiful thing is you don't have to use Bridges to use Bridges Intervention. It can be standalone. And so that is the intervention resource we purchased this year. We have online licenses. We also purchased, there's a set of 9 volumes. Each volume is its own binder. And within each volume is its own focus, its own domain, so to speak. So 1 through 4 is step 1, and that focuses at the primary kinds of content. 5-9 focuses more intermediate. We bought both, and we bought all of the manipulatives that support all of that. So you can see here we have our second bullet. So we have 1 AI, bringing that back, that language, alternative instructor. We have 1 AI at each elementary and at each middle school, budgeted for 3 years. This is year 1, so we've budgeted 2 more years from out from here. And they are the ones that we went through a great training for 4 days. So I think it's great. That's part of that. But no, it's a very comprehensive training at the beginning of the school year. And so it was 4 days. We were in these rooms here at Clark Hall together. It was our AIs. It was our instructional coaches. So instructional coaches could have that learning of the tool in the buildings as well. And so going through how to use these tools, and not just about the tool, but about just math instruction as a whole, those relationships with our children. And then we are really celebrating this, to be honest, because we've not had an opportunity to have a separate math support before. And so this has really been something special. And so far, September to March, district-wide amongst our buildings, we've serviced 455 students through this AI role and Bridges intervention. So we're definitely very happy with that. As far as the growth piece, I'm definitely analyzing all of that as well and keeping an eye on all of that. As Tia shared, our math window closes tomorrow, and I was like, are we sure this is our March topic? Shouldn't this be an April topic? I feel incomplete. So there is growth data that I want to be we are looking at as well. But I can tell you the stuff that has been entered so far from the AIs and coaches is pretty exciting. That kids who started this way and that their cells are green. You know, that next piece. So these kids, these are our most at-risk mathematicians that we had the most concerns about. And I know coming into last year and then coming into this year, countrywide, just that concern of where are our kids right now with math, and when you've not had all the instructional days and you know you didn't get to all the units, so to speak, what does that mean then for them for that year, but then for their whole trajectory? Right. And so, so really keeping an eye on where they had some misunderstanding, let's say, or just even a gap in any access to it so far, and making sure that didn't grow. And so the fact that some of these kids, not saying that they're shooting off the charts by any means, I don't know that yet, but the fact that these colors aren't turning red when the data is getting entered, that these kids are growing from math assessment to math assessment.
So the Dreambox is like virtual.
Yes,
and like kind
it's
of
an online platform that the students they have their own login and they work by themselves with the program.
And then the Bridges intervention is the tool that the AI uses.
Yeah.
So that they complement each other. And that's in person. Okay.
That is that's in person. So so to get more detailed about that, so Bridges, an initial layer is we do use math assessment. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what we would have done this year if we didn't have math. I mean, we are relying on it heavily for that norm data. So the process is to use a universal screener. So thank goodness we have one. And to go through the process, you know, we assess all our kids and we look and we can see who are the students we have most concern about or who have the most need. And then those AIs and instructional coaches at each building, they could have those smaller conversations then with the teachers and get their input. Because sometimes, you know, we do have students who maybe they're not a strong test taker or they just had that off day. And a teacher sometimes says, you know, like, she's doing amazing, really? That's their, you know, but we went ahead and we said, let's make sure, let's do our due diligence here. So we took that. And then those grade level teams could look at that data with their principal and decide, okay, what do we deem to be our biggest priorities of our grade level content that we see that these scores lack? And so we know, okay, AI, like and really using that teacher feedback of, this is the area we think these kids need to work on the most. And then the beauty of the program then is that that AI then can take that volume, and there's a placement assessment, paper, pencil, that you can do one-on-one or in small groups. And so they can take that placement assessment for that focus and then see where the kids in the grade level who need that, where they understand already within that content and what that first next step needs to be for them. And then they get going right from there, and they're called modules. And they could run for 5 days. There's 5, or I shouldn't say 5 days, 5 sessions. And on day 5 or session 5 is a progress monitoring tool. So every 5th day they're getting a progress monitor. It's very systematic, getting great feedback about it. So yeah, that's how it's used. They've made some adjustments once the mid-year map data came out. Some said, oh, you're going to stay with me, and some said, wow, amazing. And now you can work with me because you're not as concerned anymore. So.
And if I can just jump back in again, so especially for the middle school students who are receiving the Bridges intervention, those would be the students at that winter test, like in 7th and 8th grade. They were participating in this intervention, and then they took the winter test to be able to see another progress monitoring piece and to determine if they need to stay in the intervention or if they could cycle out.
So there were only like 16 in that, right?
And at the middle school level, so just in for 8th grade, I think it was 16 in 8th grade.
Different school within the grade level bands. I also have a visual for myself of how many students are being serviced at what total in the district per grade level. Yeah. And so for that primary band, again, they're all over the place, but the concentration seems to be around 2nd grade. And at the intermediate band, the concentration seems to be around 4th. And then at middle school, it seems to be around 6th into 7th.
Were the manipulatives that came with Bridges intervention different than we've been using in our district in the past?
Some are, some are not. They do have some visualizations that are a little bit different. But yeah, it just depends. Some are similar and some are different.
So with Dreambox, Lexia, how long do we have those licenses? 3 years. 3 years. So
That's
through the end
right.
of 2024. Okay.
Any questions more related to Bridges intervention? Okay. And then finally, math recovery, as Jill alluded to with the literacy piece. I mean, our greatest asset is our teachers, hands down every time. And so as much as we can feed into our classroom teachers, our intervention specialists, it's a wonderful opportunity. So math recovery is its own, is a vendor, is a professional development team. And they really focus on giving teachers training or interventionist training or, math specialist training on content knowledge for them, on really, really, truly, deeply understanding what understanding of a student looks like along a progression. And how do you identify where a student is within that progression? So not only the content knowledge, but also the assessments, showing them the assessments, training them on their own assessments, very research-based on how to administer those and how to analyze those assessments. And then, so now what? Now what do you do about it? And here are the activities. And so we have, there is a version or a course 1, and that focuses on addition and subtraction. And there's a multiplication course 2. And so we have primary teachers. This was optional because it was out of school time. These are virtual courses, but we said, if you want to put your time in, we want to pay for that course for you. So far we've had 19 teacher participants. Now with that, some of those are primary grades, and they would just take the course 1 because that's their content, addition, subtraction. If you're an intermediate teacher, and by intermediate, I'll say it's 3rd through 5th. And so the prereq to do that though with the multiplication and division courses, you have to take what's called AVMR 1 is the course. And so they've taken the addition, subtraction, and now many of them, most of them are now in the AVMR 2 course. So So when I talk about participants, that means teachers, but some of them are now on their second course. And then also at middle school, then 6th grade teachers were given the opportunity to take the fractions course, because fractions, I mean, feeding into their ratio content, all of that is so important. And now we still have 18 slots available for the 22-23 school year, should teachers want to take that opportunity. And I've already had a couple say, hey, my friend is loving this class, can I take that too? And so what we've done is we've distributed the dollars for the courses across our buildings, and using this year to give anybody a chance who wants one. And then as the time goes on, I'll keep an eye on that. And then if we see that, you know, there's just a building that has a couple really hungry people and there might be a little slot here and there available, we'll go ahead and feed that to them. So, and then you want to say something about that too?
Yeah, so at the high school, we're fortunate to have one alternate instructor who has completed all 3 courses of the training. So we've targeted our most at-risk students who are significantly above or below grade level within their math progression, identified through map data, teacher recommendations, EOC tests, as well as the math recovery assessment itself. And so that AI has worked with a caseload of about 12 to 18 students throughout the school year. At the high school, we have to balance, you know, it's a delicate balance between the requirements for graduation and the credits needed, but also filling any gaps within, you know, instruction or students' ability and skills. So her plan when meeting with students is 3 to 5 days a week, and she uses about 20 to 25 minutes of that time doing the math recovery protocols, and then 20 to 25 minutes working on, these are mainly freshmen, so the algebraic concepts that they're completing in their course, just to keep them, you know, current with what they're doing in class, but then also help them to fill gaps. The difficult part of this is that, you know, students at high school, if they have one study hall in their schedule, they're lucky, because, you know, the freshman year, there's a lot of courses that sort of drive that. So she's had a lot of success with these students. She meets with them for 2 quarters, and then she reevaluates them to see if any can sort of progress out, or if they might need a little more time. And she shared that with the students with whom she's worked this year in particular, the average growth is just over 3 grade levels. So,
Wow.
but keeping in mind those students, you know, were quite low.
I think that's the power of the math recovery professional development, though, because it really helps teachers to understand the developmental nature of how math understanding comes together. And especially at the high school level, where teachers are such content specialists at higher levels, sometimes they don't have that full understanding of, a kid comes to me and isn't, you know, algebra is not natural for them. This professional development and intervention tool has really helped to be able to fill those gaps in an intentional way.
Yeah.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah. Any questions about math recovery? Thanks.
So I just have a comment. This is really powerful. I mean, when we got the universal screener, NWEA map, and we were in a pandemic, it was really, really tough to mine the data and to use it, because it's meant to be used in a formative way. It's meant to guide learning. It's meant to show where to go next, right? So it's assessment for learning, whereas a state test is more summative, right? It's assessment of learning. It's a final outcome. It's not something you get a chance to redo. And so using these algorithmic programs like Dreambox and Lexia to kind of drive, to look at the map data and then, you know, adjust where, and then you can actually create lessons with it, it's just powerful, and it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, and our district always does really well in value added, and the reason is because of this kind of work. So value added shows us, you know, where students are in terms of a year's worth of growth, and it's the summative stuff in a pandemic is really hard to hit the mark. But the fact is, our kids are growing, and it's because our teachers are learning how to use new tools to assess where they are and to use that assessment to teach in a immediate kind of way so that growth can happen. And when you look at, I've heard people refer to state tests as autopsy data.
Right.
Because we get the scores right in May, or we don't get them in May, we get them in like mid-June, July. And by the time we come back to school, third graders in fourth grade, and it's almost like superfluous to use that data because we have math that can guide us in real time. And so I just think it's amazing that all of you have guided our teachers to do this and that they have dug down and done this work in the most challenging time maybe in the history of education. So kudos to all of you and our teachers for digging in and doing assessment for learning. Like just simple things like Sharon said, like how's it going? How are you doing? Like asking questions like that. And a lot of that's driven from our language arts curriculum, right? The conferring that takes place and the guiding that takes place. So that's where the real professional and masterful teaching comes in. And an algorithm ain't ever going to do it on its own. Lexia or Dreambox on their own, not going to get much. I think we've learned forever, right, that online learning is not the ticket. We're not going to save boatloads of money. You need to use it with expert professional teaching. So very proud of you guys. This is awesome. Proud of our teachers. This is really, really great work.
Steve, you bring up a really good point because we were talking about like we're in 2 years of recovery. Like 2 years of a pandemic leads to 2 years of recovery. So
Can you talk louder? We can't
sorry,
hear you.
sorry. I know I'm such a low cover. I was saying that Steve is right. Like we keep talking that we're in 2 years of recovery. So there's 2 years of pandemic, and then you got to get through 2 years of recovery to come out of it. Everyone, our whole world. And so here we have teachers and educators, all of you who have embraced new tools. So learning new things when you're in recovery is tough. But for you guys to be able to do that and support the children who are also doing that, I do am very, very impressed with our whole district.
And couple on all of the social emotional issues.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
I mean,
Well, the learning
it takes it another level.
the learning is relational, so that some of it is the social emotional, like asking a kid, how's it going? Or what's your topic in language arts? And can I see your opening? Or, I think I can put you in this group because you're really advancing. Those are feel-good moments that are relational and that add to the SEL part. So they're all connected, right? You don't like doing SEL without, outside of instruction. You can do that and it can help, but doing it as you're teaching is phenomenal.
Joan, I have a question. Joan is a parent, Joan is a GJA teacher. So all of the focus for both the ELA and the math up to this point, understandably so, has been on learning loss with students who are at perhaps a larger deficit. Do we have data that suggests that the same growth and the same attention are being given to middle, to high average, to above average students? As a parent of one, I just worry that sometimes in the district, all means all. So a year's worth of growth is a year's worth of growth for all students. So I'm just wondering if that is playing out with any of the research or the special programming or the use of, all of the art money, all of the ESSER money can be used for learning loss. It doesn't define learning loss as just one subset of students.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering what those are for the middle to above average.
So we don't have it broken down by the different levels of students in this presentation, but we absolutely can get that data. And I know that the buildings are looking at the different groups of students at the different grade levels and how they're performing. So we can get that, but for all of the data, and I don't know if Aaron or Sharon or Jason want to speak to, but I just know from what we have included in the presentation, it is just that real general overview, but we absolutely can provide that data of the breakdown.
No, go ahead. No.
Sure. And it's not number specific, but at least on this slide right here, Dreambox and math recovery is for all. And so these aren't just for students who there's a concern about. This is all of our students would have. So the Dreambox, all of our kids have.
Up to grade 5.
Up to grade 5,
correct.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So 6-12, there's nothing for them in math. if you're not qualifying for a specialty program for the 2 years of learning loss that have happened?
Well, there, I mean, we could talk a lot about different things that go on in the classroom.
Right.
That aren't on these particular slides. I mean, there's, and we didn't spend ESSER funds on them. But like, so for instance, one thing that's not here, again, it's not an ESSER thing, but all of our 6th and 7th grade math teachers and intervention specialists this year had very specific professional development over 3 different days with assignments in between on progressions. And so not, and you know, how do you really look at the your questions? Are they assessing kinds of questions, or are they advancing kinds of questions? So really giving teachers, again, putting the PD actually in the teachers to improve that, the use of manipulatives, that kind of thing. We've been ordering different, you know, math magazines so that they can be reading about actually like the application, like, oh, look at the math in this skate park. You know, here are these mathematicians, I'm going to read about this person and the application. So it's a great question, Joan. But yeah, we definitely want to make sure we're reaching a span of learners. These particular slides just happen to be about that focus.
Understandably, and it's an important focus. I just don't want to lose the fact that there are many types of kids in this district.
Yeah.
We just want to make sure that they're all getting what they deserve for the last 2 years.
I would add too, though, that the math data also helps teachers specifically target ways to push students then as well in their, you know, small groups and things like that. So not necessarily in like a full out sense, like it's been discussed for below grade level students, but also in the regular.
I'm thinking more of as a federal taxpayer, my federal tax money went to money that was supposed to be spent for kids. I want to make sure that money's being spent on things and programs and special services that are for all.
Benefit all kids. Yeah.
So I guess my question was actually exactly that, but one of the things I'm curious about at the high school, because I don't trust my memory anymore, but the past room that we put in, that was a newer, right? Or has that been there?
Classroom.
Did we increase the subjects?
Actually,
Did we do
yeah.
something?
Yeah,
that was
so
different?
it did change. When Past Room was initially implemented many years ago, it was in place back when I was still teaching, which has been a while. There was representation from all 4 core areas, math, science, social studies, and English. But over time and looking at the students who were coming down and what their needs were that were coming down, it eventually shifted to just math and English because that's where more of the students were coming for. And then again, over time, we noticed that more students were coming for math. So now Past Room is just math support.
So did we not do anything different during the pandemic to increase?
Yes, we did. We paid teachers to run virtual Past Room when we were in
What's different?
remote learning and hybrid learning.
When we were doing that, the virtual, did we increase the number, the kind of subjects, or no? It was still only.
We had all of them.
That's
For
what I
the
thought.
virtual.
All of them.
But now it's not. It's back down to where it was before. And even with math, it's not all it's not all areas of math that are available, right?
Yeah, I mean, any student can go to the Past Room for math. And there's a licensed math teacher in there.
Just a matter of some.
So
There's nobody, for example, to help a student in pre-calculus in the Past Room.
that's something that if we were to know of a need for that, then we could help accommodate that. But typically, the pre-calc students are going to their teacher. There aren't.
Okay.
There's just not as many students.
Okay.
that
I guess
need
I
that
was
support.
thinking that, I don't know why I was thinking that we had done something even more that was different, but it was really just the fact that we were offering it in a virtual setting. Okay.
Because I didn't realize we just went to math. Right, I thought other subjects were being.
And that has truly been just based on the students that are coming out. And when they look at basically the data of students that are accessing and where that need is, it was a greater need for math support in the past.
So I guess I go back then to the original question, which is what is it? And what have we thought about doing for students at the middle and high school levels who aren't being identified? I mean, it's a pretty small group of students that we're talking about that are being identified for, I think, I mean, if I'm understanding the slides correctly, that are being identified for pull-out services. What about the will be other students.
The higher achieving.
Well, even just, I'm not even
Average.
just average achieving students, yeah.
So a lot of that is built into the supports that are happening in the classrooms. I know, and Jason, you could probably, obviously, you could speak to this better than I can, being at the high school. But there is still support. Like sometimes students will sign a pass to go see their teacher during a study hall, or if they know the teacher, like I think there's after school pass room that they have where students can access from that perspective. But a lot of times it's more so embedded kind of in that classroom setting. And so the teacher kind of sets up the support needed for the kids within that setting. But again, one of the things that MAP specifically has afforded us is to be able to truly see where the needs are. And so, as I had mentioned earlier, from the MTSS process is really taking a look at the big picture of data for all of the groups of students, identifying where the different needs are, and then aligning the supports to be able to match those needs. So that still is a work in progress with this being our first year, but that has been a part of the conversation for sure.
And just to remind also with the piece about meeting the needs of all, I hear you, Joan. And just a reminder too that our core instruction has been designed even pre-pandemic and continues to be refined to do just that. I mean, at the middle school, we have 3 grade levels, but we have 7 math courses there. So, you know, some of our kids, they leave with already having geometry, if that's what that need is for those kids. So none of that went away. We've just added more additional support too.
I think what is going through my head is students who were fresh, I mean, just starting into that algebra sequence when the pandemic hit. And I mean, they've moved, right?
You're talking about support for students who might not be functioning to a degree that they were before the pandemic.
Yeah, and
so not an extension, but a support for let's get back to
right
what we have the potential to perform.
Yes, and it's important not just for that student in that class, but that's what, when they go and they take their SAT and their ACT, I mean, it's critical.
I think one of the things that, as I'm listening to this conversation, that some school districts have done is a thing called conference period, where at the end, this is mainly at the high school, it can be done at the middle school level as well, where there's a period of time after school, a couple days a week, where students can actually go see their own teacher for help. And the teachers are paid to stay for a half hour or 40 minutes. And if a student's involved in a sport, they have, you know, the coaches excuse them. So they, you know, the pass room is great, but you're not necessarily seeing your teacher, right? You might be seeing, you know, certainly a licensed math teacher that's good, but you know, it's expensive to, you know, some school districts have that. It's almost like an extra period and teachers get paid to be there. It's very expensive, but it's also very effective. So if you want to look at helping all kids, and whether it's pre-calc or geometry or calculus, that's one avenue to look at it. You know, there's a researcher at Harvard named Ron Ferguson came up with this by surveying kids and asking, what do you need? It's like, how do you get kids who traditionally might not have taken calculus? How do you get them to take that risk and do it? What they said they needed, these kids, when he surveyed them, was help. I need help when I struggle. Right? I need help with my teacher when I struggle. Right. And so it's a huge investment, but it's very effective.
So is that an option for the ESSER funds for the core to advanced students over the next 2 years?
I don't know. I mean, it would be something could be talked about. It would definitely be negotiating with the union, definitely sitting down and looking at it. But and you know, at this point we have a contract that's formulated. But at the end of the day, it's something to have a discussion with about maybe at some point. You know, you can look at districts and to see, and you know, ask them if it's successful. I know a few of them that are doing.
I think what is going through my head is that certainly there are some students who live in houses where they're able to afford a tutor, but that's not the case for all of our students.
Yeah.
A question, do the teachers kind of informally hook up or batch students that are advanced or
Like a
able
peer
to
tutoring.
tutor or mentor other students? I think like my daughter's had some of that, but like I think mentoring and students get so much when they're helping other students and mentoring and students who are just able and willing. I mean, is there anything, is that kind of an informal, like
Students
a
helping
case?
students or,
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's what he's saying.
yeah.
Yeah.
I know through NHS, some of our NHS students have, that they use that as community service hours, like a peer tutoring kind of thing. I know that's something that our school counseling department is working toward, more student groups and opportunities like that. So yes, it is happening. And to what extent, I think we can expand upon that. But I think that's definitely an opportunity that could really impact a lot of students.
Yeah, I love that. I've seen it happen and it's really effective. It helps both the student that's doing it and the students that get it, and gives them a connection. And in high school, they could connect with a middle schooler who feels like maybe a little more comfortable coming into high school because they've already, been interacting. So,
I love
and it's
that.
free.
I love that, Dion, because at the college level, that's how a lot of the tutoring
Yeah.
works. And so I know like one of mine felt a little bit uncomfortable that it wasn't like a teacher as a tutor. And but once they got into like the tutoring, they were like, oh, this is great. So it could actually help with the comfort too. As they,
And something they could put on their resume.
yeah.
All of these ideas have to be embedded in the culture and known. So you could have
Right.
like the conference during I'm talking about, and kids may not go, right? But in the districts that I know they're doing this, the way it tends to work is you look at Infinite Campus, you see the grades aren't what work is missing. Parent says, you're not going to volleyball practice, you're going to conferences after school, and you're going to get the help you need. And that's and so the parents know that help is available, and they steer their kids to it when they're falling, when they see them falling behind. And the key is they already have a relationship with the teacher they have, and that teacher's teaching them. And it's not it's a huge investment, and it has to be done in a way that's communicated where the whole community knows about it, and it's actually going to get used.
I just, as a casual observation, is there's been, that I've seen, and I'm not on social media a lot, but it seems like a lot of parents have been posting, do you know of a tutor for? And so, like Earl said, that's for the families that can pay for it. I'm worried about the families that can't pay for it, right? And
I think Elizabeth had a question.
I was just gonna comment that I thought that was actually a great idea, and I also love mentoring. But I think before we invest in something like that as a district, we need to survey the parents, see if they would even be able to send their kid, because some kids ride the bus or they might not have transportation or
Right.
something.
So that's part of the expense, Elizabeth, is there's an extra bus that
Oh,
takes kids
okay.
home. I mean, it is hugely, very costly to do something.
I do know that some of the peer tutoring happening at the high school is happening in the school day.
we
So
can't
it's-
hear you.
some of the tutoring that's happening at the high school for the peer assistance, that's happening in the school day. So it's like within the study hall. So it's matching up two students who have the same study hall period. So that's the way we're working around that right now, because outside of school hours, we just that's not equitable.
I think Catherine has a question. Oh, and Angela too.
Just an observation, and that is that when I taught at the Wellington School, they had a longer school day. So their school day started at 8 a.m. and went until 3:30, but in every single one of those days, there was a half-hour flex period. And it was a half hour at the end of the day. And so flex period was all inclusive, and you could do anything during the flex period, including tutoring, small group, small group instruction,
Right.
sectionals, clubs, everything. And so that was just one of the advantages of having the flex period, because as a teacher, we were, when I taught in a different district, when we had, school from 8:15 to 2:45 every day, we were always trying to fit that individual instruction into the school day. This, the individual instruction, sectionals, the tutoring, all the things that we're trying to cram into the school day. So not that I'm suggesting that we add another half hour to our school day. I'm just saying that as a model.
My child will riot.
No, I'm not saying that we should do that, because that has budgetary implications, logistical implications, busing implications, all the things, right? But what I'm saying is that is a model that exists out there,
Yeah.
that there is a flex period
Yeah.
every single day,
Yeah.
and it necessitates time.
Yeah.
So
I think anything like this, the best thing to do is pilot and experiment. Because if you just did it, right, and it could be a huge sunk cost that doesn't get used, right? So it's just an idea that is worth thinking about, long term maybe.
And we've actually got another math slide here.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, Angela, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I know that, and maybe this is what we were talking about with, during the school day, but I've seen where National Honor Society offers like
Yeah.
tutoring for middle schoolers.
Yeah.
But then I was also thinking about, me in high school, your friends that are in the same class, and maybe this goes along with what Dion was saying, is, just having the opportunities for kids to have a classroom where they can go do their work together without it costing anything to the district, just, making those opportunities available for the kids to work together, because, you really pick up a lot just by working with your classmates. So.
I just a collaboration time.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, I'll finish up here with the lab 2 and then Sharon has 1. These last couple of resources that were purchased were driven by teacher requests. So our math department is the department that uses the formative the most frequent. It's a digital platform that allows teachers to post practice problems or homework, and then students can submit their responses and receive feedback immediately. Within the settings, there's also an opportunity where if the student gets an incorrect answer, they can resubmit that answer and make correction if needed. There are lots of different types of questions that can be asked with this platform. So multiple choice, a numeric answer, matching, short response or paragraphs that will automatically grade the response and give student feedback immediately. And currently we have 1,561 formatives that have been assigned this year from 16 different math teachers. And then our IXL, IXL is used by our math teachers. The high school, it's used by our double block algebra teacher, our EL, our English language teachers, geometry intensive strategies, as well as our algebra 2 skills classes. This is a personalized learning platform that is designed to improve learning outcomes for students using a process where they first are given a diagnostic assessment that will identify any knowledge or skills gaps. And then from that, students are placed on a path where they're given individual practice problems based on where their needs are shown. They're monitored using a SMART score. So the SMART score is not an accuracy score. It's calculated by an algorithm that accounts for the difficulty of the questioning, the speed, and the accuracy of student responses. And then that is used to monitor student progress throughout. And as students answer, it will fill the pie for them and they progress to where their next gap deficit is. And the analytics that it provides allows teachers to make individual accommodations for students or add practice based on what they're seeing. It also allows for the teacher to make effective instructional decisions that could impact the entire class. So it's sort of two-pronged in that regard. It's also aligned to our CPM curriculum as well as the MAP assessment. And
That's the name of our middle school and high school math curriculum.
And then, so this year I put up here, so far we've had 3,433 skills practiced, 2,063 skills proficient, and 1,279 skills mastered. And the proficient level is really what we want students to get to. After 3 attempts, the program won't continue to ask the questions if they've tested proficient, but if they within those 3 attempts get the correct answer, then that's where they are deemed mastered. So that's the difference there. And then speaking with the teacher who uses this most frequently, our algebra teacher, she shared that as of early March, the average student demonstrated almost a full year's worth of growth. So that's also something to celebrate.
I will just add with this. So IXL is essentially like the Dreambox for upper grades in terms of it does span kindergarten through 12th grade standards. So it can be used at any of the levels, but it's not it's a little bit more mature in the way that it presents itself. And so when we were thinking about just an online tool that could be used to help our older students, we were trying to find one that would be able to support the skills needed, but also that they would want to engage in. And if it's too elementary, they're not going to want to do it, right? So we also had started just like from a pilot perspective to even see if it would be something to consider in the future. And so like I said, it does span 12th grade. So it can go and be used for our students that are also accelerating through content. But right now we had it on a smaller scale with our double block and EL students.
And the nice part about this is that it can be used as like a bell, like a warm-up activity, or it can be used as a station rotation. So it's a lot of flexibility as a supplement tool for the teacher.
Okay, and then finally, and this is short and sweet, but building fact fluency is something that we are going to be piloting next year with a small group of teachers. And it is for fluency development. It would be in core instruction. So all of our students, there's a addition subtraction kit for K2 and multiplication division for 3-5. And then also conversations about trickling that up into 6th grade as well. And they have a double block time, so they would have time to use this activity there too. The plan was that this pilot was going to happen this year, but this is definitely something different. It's definitely something more. And this wasn't the year for that, for our teachers. So when we had to create these plans well before the school year started, and a lot with the fun, what are our needs, right? Fluency development for sure, that kind of thing. Then, okay, there's this great tool, let's pilot it before we really roll it out to all. And we just needed to pump the brakes on that a little bit. But I definitely have some excited people who said, whatever happened, aren't we going to? And I said, just hold on. So.
Okay, so just to kind of round this out with the other additional tech tools that we have had since the onset of the pandemic, really kind of just giving you an update. Looking at Sora Overdrive, so as a reminder, that is another web-based tool that gives us access to ebooks and audiobooks. Overdrive is essentially the marketplace to purchase those books, and then Sora is the digital reading app that students would use to access those books. And if you can remember, at the height of the pandemic, we weren't sure if we could get books in the hands of students. And so we purchased essentially like a bulk of money so that we can buy individual licenses to ebooks and audiobooks for students so that they could still get access to reading while they were at home. And then as more information came out, we realized that we could get more books to students, which we were able to do. Basically, though, we've just been using the pot of money that we have in Overdrive Sora and getting books to students in different manners. So of course, being back in the buildings, our students have ample access to physical text, but we do still have students that benefit or prefer ebooks and audiobooks. And so we've just kind of been, like I said, plugging away from that pot of money that we have. So there has been no additional money spent for Overdrive Sora since that initial purchase with ESSER 1, I believe. So far though, we have, one other piece before that. When Overdrive, when we first connected with Overdrive, they kept talking to us about how they were trying to finalize the partnership with Columbus Metropolitan Libraries so that we could have, because they were connected with many other libraries around the state. And then this year they did finalize that connection. And so our students also have access to CMLs to their library with or without a library card. So we still encourage our students and families to get that library because we want to keep the library card, because we want to keep that partnership going, but that it now has also expanded our access to text based on CMLs, their catalog. And so with that, this year we've had 1,968 ebooks and audiobooks opened in Sora, and 1,336 hours of reading, which is about 111 minutes per book per month.
Do you know, I know, I remember elementary teachers talking about it. Do you know at the middle and high school level, is it being used?
Yes, and so this is a mix of elementary,
I know
middle,
that
and
the
high.
material would be available, that
Yes.
is middle, but do you know, is it being shared with the students and families?
Yes, yes, and what I can do, again, I just have the overall for the entire district, but I can go back in and see the different levels.
I'd be curious to see.
Yeah, I will definitely get that to you. I know, so most of our coaches now know how to access the text, and so they do it without me, but at the beginning of the year, I did have people who were reaching out, asking for specific titles that they wanted, and a lot of it was coming from our secondary staff, so our middle school and high school staff, but I can absolutely get that data for you.
12th grade, yes, because there was renewed interest in our house.
Yeah.
With the library password and where's the library card?
The other thing that we have with this is, again, that extended access over the summer. So that's information that we pushed out last summer as here's a way to keep kids engaged in some learning and some reading. They can access Sora and they can access the texts that are available. And we'll be sending that out again for this summer. Thanks.
That's great. Renewed interest.
Then we have Class Kick, which is primarily used, actually, I think it's only used at our middle schools, but it's a app and web-based tool that allows teachers to create assignments and like short assessments that they can push out to students. And then teachers can see the students thinking and they can see their response to those assignments in real time. Based on the screen that they have, so they can get in and see how students are working on the problem and then give immediate feedback there. Again, it was initially created to help classes go paperless. And so teachers kind of use a blend of what they're doing in the classroom plus what they push out as like either bell work or additional assignments that they do for homework. But the teachers can create those assignments and then again, see students work on those assignments based on their screen. We have 105 teacher accounts set up across the 3 middle schools, and 9,013 assignments have been created this year.
I just want to say I'm glad I went to school in the 70s.
Kathy and I like our paper.
We like paper. What if I changed my mind how I answered that question a couple times, right?
So paper's not gone. This is again, there's definitely still a lot of paper and writing down because you know that there's a lot of things you can see when you're walking around and students are actually writing and working on some things. And this just, I think, makes it a little bit easier, especially when students are doing the work at home, that teachers can come back in and see kind of the thinking that students had as they were doing that work. Screencastify is the screen recorder and video creator. Again, it was one that was very heavily used in that first year because it helped teachers to be able to create lessons, even from distance learning and when we were in hybrid, that they could push out where it was almost like demos and the actual lesson. And I'm thinking especially about like, in the hybrid sense. So when you had one cohort of students in the classroom with you and the other cohort at home, the teacher could push out the lesson and it still be guided for the students that were at home while they were in front of the kids and vice versa. We also used it a lot as an administrative and curriculum team to push out short tutorials and or short like professional development lessons to get into the hands of teachers that could be watched on their own time at different times without having to like pull in for an insert service in person and things like that. And so we still have that this year, and it is being used. Unfortunately, I don't have the current usage for Screencastify right now. I had put out the request. We've gotten a new account rep, and they haven't gotten back to me yet. So as soon as I get that, I will get that information to you. So I don't have the usage for Screencastify just yet. And then lastly, we have Pear Deck, which is another presentation tool, but essentially what it does is takes like Google Slides and makes them more interactive. And again, it was one of those things that was introduced because when we were in that distance learning, a teacher could do their slide deck, their lesson in a Google slide, and then make it interactive, push it out to the students, and the students could respond either to the answers, they could draw on it, they might select or match different things. Pear Deck allowed it to become like that interactive piece that students can do. So we still have it this year. We do still have teachers that are using it, but again, it's more of a balance between what's done in a Google slide versus what is actually done in the classroom with manipulatives or in group work. So we have 115 teachers that have used Pear Deck so far this year, and it's been primarily at the middle school and the high school, with 2,961 distinct presentations created.
And Tia, these tools, when we made the decisions about what to keep after that initial, remote learning and hybrid learning year, with purchase of the ESSER 1 funded, we had surveys out to teachers. What are the tools you want to keep? What are the ones you're using the most? How are you using them? And then from there, the usage reports have helped us to kind of say, okay, teachers are still using this one, but not so much this one.
And so, we continue to use, we have several tools and interventions that weren't purchased by ESSER, so that we did not highlight them in this presentation, but that are very much still embedded in our classrooms and in our schools right now. So I just wanted to highlight, like, these aren't the only things that are being used, but these are definitely the ones that we're highlighting today. So I know the last slide says questions, but I know we've been asking questions throughout. So any other questions? Yes.
Do you feel that this will catch kids up? Obviously you do, but do you really, do you see it happening?
Yes, we are seeing in small pockets, and I do think that that's still going to be work that happens over time. But what I feel like we are at a better place now to really identify where the needs are and to more appropriately place students in the supports that they need. I feel like we're definitely at a much better place than what we have been in the past. And we have had phenomenal resources and we have had good data. Now we have, I think, better data, and we're learning how to use that more to really identify where our students' needs are, whether it's students that do have major deficits, or it is also the students who we know they're at the mark or beyond their grade level, and we need to still continue to grow them. We have better data now to help us to help them more. So I do feel like it will help, but it is going to take some time.
You have 2 years.
2 years, yes. Here, put us on that. Yes.
So, Joan Miller, GJA president, asking this question. How is the district going to work with teachers to determine if the MAP testing, the timing, and the frequency is appropriate for what we're doing? So I've heard from a lot of teachers that especially K2, it's taking kids like 80, 85 minutes to sit for one reading test. And especially the smarter you are, the harder your questions get, so the longer you take. So like, especially at the primary levels, kids are really having meltdowns because they're sitting for an hour and a half on a math test, and then turning around an hour and a half on a reading test. Yeah. So I've heard from teachers that are just really concerned that the 3 times and the length of time, on top of all the other testing that we have to do, what's the plan moving forward? We understood that this was a year to try it out, but are there decisions?
Yes, so yes. And one of the things that we are going to do is really take a look at, with administrators and teachers, how did the implementation go, and take a look at the windows that were set and what adjustments need to be made to those windows, take into consideration exactly those things that you had mentioned. Because the one thing that I didn't mention about MAP, it's an untimed test. And so, on average, it's supposed to take 30 to 40 minutes per, but it is based on the student and it is adaptive. So how they're answering then dictates the next question they're going to get. So if they get the question right, then the next question is going to be a little bit more challenging. And it's going to keep doing that until they get a question wrong, and then it backs up, trying to pinpoint exactly where they are. So our students who are higher achieving and are really focused on wanting to get that right answer, it can take a long time. And so also I think a lot of that comes into the more that we learn about the intent of the test, and helping helping the kids to understand like that it's not connected to grades, it's not connected to that part is going to take time too. But I think gathering that feedback from staff, gathering that feedback from principals, gathering that feedback from families, just in terms of like the whole process is going to help us to refine the testing.
So on the opposite end of that, I know that math is available not just in math and reading, but also science. And is that the only other?
It has a its language usage is the other one, and those are separate. Like it's an additional purchase for both of those.
So I am not advocating for increased testing. I just want to make that clear. But I know that when initially you talked about using math, it was kind of like there was a discussion about whether or not it makes sense to use science. Has there been any?
We have not had a follow-up question yet because we really did want to get through this first year of using it with math and reading and be able to kind of reflect on what the whole process and implementation has looked like, as well as what the data is telling us and how we're using that data. I think that me personally, so this is just my decision, like my opinion, we would definitely have to process it as a full team. I think that would be a conversation better suited for next year after we've gotten through this full year, but I definitely think it's a conversation we still need to have.
And a conversation about the language use. I mean, language usage is, I believe, for the last 3 years, the lowest subtest on the ACT, SATs that the kids take at the high school. The language is the lowest.
Science.
So if that's a serious concern, then I would think we'd want data on that earlier rather than later versus I took the SAT and I'm not good at it. Like I'd rather have that information as a parent in 7th or 8th grade, so that if I'm going to do tutoring prep, then I know what my child needs in order to be successful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Science as well for that same ACT piece, right?
And the other good thing, so I know Jill had mentioned it earlier, talked about the alignment to the predictors for our state test. It also has predictors for college readiness and performance on ACT and SAT. So all of those things is what we're looking at as well, especially when we get that spring data. That will start to give us, again, so where are those areas that we need to focus on.
So my overall question is, as you have this year's worth of math data and you're forming classes for next year, will for a teacher, like what is the spectrum of levels that teacher, I mean, right now they have to be pretty broad, right? Like how many intelligence levels, are in a single classroom. That information is I would be fascinated to see that and see how we use that information.
There's definitely an art to, creating class lists. I know that in many of our buildings, especially at the lower levels, there's, a multi-layered spreadsheet where they're taking a look at academic performance and behavioral needs and then trying to make sure classes are kind of pretty balanced so that no one teacher is overloaded. But of course, the intensity of need within that average varies. But I think working in the math data is another academic, performance piece that we can be looking at when making those class lists.
Well, and the tighter all of those variables are, that the similarity, I guess, let me take it the opposite. The wider that variance is, the smaller that number of students in a classroom should be, right? Does that correlation exist?
That's from the teacher side.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I want to ask a follow-up question. So let's just say there's a class of 22 kids. Then if there are, I'm just, averaging this out, the same number of high achieving, average, and low achieving. What you're saying is if there are more, like there are bigger gaps.
Yeah, if there aren't equals, but then I'm looking at the high achieving and the low achieving, what's that
full
span,
range, that
right?
spectrum.
And then so I'm saying, the wider that range, the fewer the number of students should be in that classroom, right? I mean, the more narrow that range, the less she has to come up with 17 different ways to approach her students.
So if there
Or
were.
he, I'm not being sexist.
Sorry, guys.
The teacher. Because that's kind of my question in regards to this is great information overall. And I think overall we're looking very good with where the numbers are. We'd like to see the spring numbers, obviously, when they come out. But by building and by class is really, I know it's a lot of detail, but when we're looking at strategically about what's the goal of class sizes, additional help by building, because I think one of the slides said we have like one per school. I could make the argument, is that really the right number? I don't know. It could be maybe this school needs 3. And how does the one school, are they really getting utilized at the same level? I don't know, but I think that's something that as we're looking to, build everybody up over that 2 years, I think each school has the potential to look very different from one another. And I would just challenge all of us to say, we have to kind of break the norms of what it might have been in the past to say what we need for the future, the next 2 years.
Especially 2 years.
Could look totally different. And, I would just say, you need to know that we're all open to that.
Sure.
Like we're open to those kind of conversations because we want to do what we can for the students to kind of get back up to the bar.
And I'm going to piggyback on that also for the teachers, because like I said, I think some of their stress now is trying to make lessons adaptable for a very wide spectrum of student intelligence, right? So I think it also impacts our teachers when that variance is so great.
So one comment and then a follow-up question. So I think I shared at the finance committee last week that, part of the conversations we've been having involves taking a look at the data across the district by building and looking at the needs and then kind of reallocating, support staff accordingly. We're having those conversations, we're starting those conversations specifically in the area of literacy. We have kind of a traditional baseline that we've always had X number of reading teachers in every building and things like that. But really trying to take a look at, where is that need and how do we have those supports allocated? With the math AIs, as Sharon said, we've never really had math support in the district in that manner. And so, I think this first year, making sure everybody got access to some support, but then from there kind of spilling over and taking a look at the data as far as, resource allocation goes as well. I think that can definitely be part of our conversations. And then my follow-up question is, so Daphne, are you maybe suggesting that when class lists are made, we should have more, we should group like kids so that teachers don't have the wide variety of student needs to address?
I mean, obviously, I think the teachers that can handle that wide variance, the teachers probably that need a closer common and so managerially just using your resources for the best of that teacher so that it's not difficult for them to adapt and handle that wide, especially if they have a concentration of either emotional behavior issues, right? Within that whole spectrum, right? But then that range of intelligence is like, I mean, it is, like you said, it's an art, but I just really feel like understanding how that teacher has to come up with, if the AI's direction matches maybe the top third of the students, right? She still has to come up with a different way to teach, or the teacher has to teach 2/3 of the students a different way, right? Yeah. And so that's where I just feel like a lot of the exhaustion that I hear when I talk to teachers is, it's not like we just create one lesson plan and everybody gets it, right?
I think that's where it does get complicated though, as someone whose son was on an IEP where he did need that extra help, he also was pushed by others that were maybe understanding it quicker than he was. And he would tell you that. And so I think that helped him. So I totally hear what you're saying, Daphne, and I think that goes back to that whole art of there's a balance to that. I don't know that magical formula. I'm sure you guys do or are closer to it than me, but that's where I would just caution us. If we group two like together, they can't learn from each other.
Oh, no.
I think it's more from the standpoint of, if I'll make it up, if you have 25 kids in the class and you have that big of a range, is there, depending on the grade level, is there a scenario where that could be reduced, so you might still have a wider spectrum, but you have 15 or 18 kids? That's more the point, versus if you get to the 25 to 26 or whatever it could be, and then you have behavioral issues or other issues going on as well. That's where it becomes the bigger challenge, right? I would just say that that's something that,
yeah, we can continue to have conversations. There's a lot that goes into class makeup, right? And just a variety of conversations, right? There's the benefit of students learning from students with other different abilities. There's conversations related to tracking. There's conversations related to when we get into, you kind of said, the teachers that maybe do better with a certain type of kid, but oftentimes those teachers then feel a lot of pressure. They feel, year after year after year, I'm getting the most challenging students. And so that becomes draining. And so it's just, it really, it's a big discussion.
I think would it ever make sense, and I guess I'm throwing this out there, to kind of start to divide even in the elementary level, because I know once you get to middle and high school, kids are entering like history classes, or there are different, levels to math, LA, when I was in school, we had challenge classes. So it's not quite a level of gifted, but maybe a certain amount of students are in the base level class, a certain amount of students are in a challenging class. And so it allows them to kind of separate a little bit, even in elementary, just to let those advanced students get attention. I know there aren't as many different classes, in elementary, but
sounds a little bit like tier gifted. We do have that. We have tier 1, and then we have tier 2. Joan actually manages a lot of that work in professional development. But it is specific to students identified as gifted or that meet, one of the criteria, actually 2 criteria, but in different ways. So yeah, this could be part of the conversation.
And that starts in 4th grade?
We start math at 3rd grade and language arts at 4th grade. But we've been having a lot of conversations also about our gifted model and the right service plan and program.
Maybe if they were added like middle level, where they're not necessarily gifted, but that's slightly more advanced.
That's tier 2. Yeah.
Okay, so that already.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was new.
We opened up that for English for readers this year in 7th grade at middle school.
Right.
So before you had to be gifted to get in, but before 7th grade, there is nothing
That's
other
for the
than
elementary.
gifted services, which are tier 1 or tier 2.
Okay.
Correct.
Yeah, the elementary.
Thank you for the presentation.
Yes, thank you.
We have more. We have another topic.
Oh, my gosh.
But I'll be fast.
Okay.
Oh, God. That's right.
COVID-19.
COVID-19 update, just a few slides to go through. The first two slides are very quick. They just highlight the communication that was recently sent out when we went to mask optional on February 17th, and then the most recent update that changed reporting requirements for school districts. But the statement at the bottom is actually the most important piece, that even though some of those requirements have gone away, we continue to be diligent about monitoring that data. And so I do have that data for us. This has been kind of our look over the course of the year, week by week. And as we get more weeks, the table gets longer, but I did zoom specifically into the data since we went mask optional. And so student positives, you can see over the last 5 weeks has been a lot lower than what we were seeing, before we made that decision. So that's been a positive. This is the weekly school spread. I didn't actually zoom in specifically on the last 5 weeks, but you can see lots of zeros down here. We did have one this week that was a possible at one of the elementary schools, but data is looking, definitely low, and we're happy to see that.
It's matching the community.
Yeah, I said it would be quick.
There you go. Good job. Good job. Good job.
Hopefully the data's good, when the data's positive.
Any final questions from the board? Any final questions from our guests?
One quick question, from the finance meeting last week, I was looking at, I noticed that on SO2, there was money for elementary level and high school building library replacements. Can you explain that?
Sure. When we were in remote learning and hybrid learning, and we needed to get resources to kids at home, we wanted them to also have books in their hands. And so we sent books home, and all those books didn't necessarily come back. So we needed to replenish
In a big way.
our supply at all levels.
Okay, so it's just replacing lost titles.
I just want to clarify. I was just telling her, I did not mean to cause alarm when I was saying earlier about having like the longer. That is not what I was saying. I did not realize I was sitting next to the GJEA. Like I did not. She's like sitting here.
You said that.
I was not trying to cause alarm. What I was trying to say is that when there is a dedicated set aside time that is specified for just that type of thing, it's a very helpful tool, and it allows teachers to relax because they don't have to cram all that individual instruction and small group instruction into their class time. That's all I'm trying to say. Whether that happens before school, after school,
When I'm at school
during
till 6
school,
o'clock, I know that I'm fine.
it doesn't matter. What I'm saying is when it's dedicated, set aside, and labeled, it will be very much used, and it allows the teacher to relax the pace of the instruction during the actual class. That's all I was trying to say.
Thank you.
I'm not trying to extend this.
Kathy, you're trending on Twitter right
Get her.
Other questions? All right, well, it is 8:49 p.m. and we are adjourned for student learning and achievement.
We have a special meeting in the other room.
Same.